Chapter 305. 3. Liensher's Origins 3. Upon hearing his voice, the woman's body jumped slightly. Tell him what? Tell him about all the things that you gave up because of him, and that he cannot treat you like that. Her hands hanging at her sides unconsciously clenched up. What does it matter if I tell him? The woman laughed softly, her voice seemingly turned a little hoarse from despair. Didn't you see it yourself just now? He will not believe a single word I say. It is probably fated that the people from the races of gods and demons would never come to bear fruition. The next day, things turned out just as the man said. He got the demon race's disciples to seize the woman and brought her out to be displayed before everyone. People from the gods' race watched their every move. Those actions had of course not escaped their attention, but word had already come down from above that they had already given up on this heir. So what were the guys from the demon race up to now? Are they still trying to use that useless pawn to threaten them? I heard that the gods' race are prepared to give up on this heir of theirs and do not care whether this woman lives or dies. The man's violet eyes were filled with an indecipherable sort of mirth as he walked slowly over to the woman and grabbed her chin in his hand, forcibly raising her head up. Although the pale and highly haggard countenance looked rather worn out, there was still a hidden stubborn strength within her eyes. Seeing that, the amusement on the man's face became more intense. What a pitiful thing you are. You've done everything you can to do so much for the gods' race, but in the end, they have mercilessly abandoned you so quickly. Do you want to exact revenge on them? Without waiting for the woman to respond, the man turned to the people from the gods' race and said, because of your so-called face and dignity, you are willing to give up on such an outstanding heir. I must say that the cold-bloodedness of the gods' race has really opened my eyes to see you in a new light, whom I will say have even surpassed us, the demon race itself that pales in comparison. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You've enough of your useless jabbering. Just what do you want? Someone from the gods' race grew impatient and opened his mouth to ask. The man gave a lazy smile and responded, It's nothing really, but because this heir of yours here would rather die than to join the demon race here, a rather loyal member of the gods' race, I must say. So in order to fulfill her wish, I decided to allow her an appropriate death, so that all of you from the gods' race will hold her in grateful remembrance and keep her forever deep in your hearts. After he finished saying those words, the people from the gods' race were in an uproar. The woman whose face had been calm and at peace suddenly appeared startled as she stared blankly at the man standing before her, looking like she was feeling a little bewildered by the man's words. It was a little different from what he had said before. He had clearly said such cold and heartless words that day, which chilled her heart completely. But in the end, why was he defending her before the people from the gods' race, trying to fill the hearts of those people with guilt by making them think that she was sacrificing herself for the sake of the entire gods' race? Chapter 305. 4. Liensher's Origins 3. But only she herself knew the best what she held in her own heart. Isn't he absolutely disgusted with her? Why then, why not we execute her with death by 1,000 cuts? Using an unbelievably sharp blade to slice the flesh of a person piece by piece should be absolutely fascinating. The man's handsome countenance looked so harmless as his mouth spouted those brutal and cruel blood-filled words. Death by 1,000 cuts. Do you know how painful it would be? Every single slice onto the flesh would make you wish you would die in that instant, but can only feel that insufferable and excruciating pain that is so much worse than dying, the sweet release of death coming to you only when the last drop of blood drips out from your body. It is said that only the most exceptional among executors will be able to carry out such a high-level form of execution, causing his victim to suffer the most intolerable pain and not die from the torment. Coincidentally, we happen to have people of such capabilities here within the demon race, so why don't we let everyone here have a chance to widen our horizons today? How about that, everyone? Just hearing the man describe it was enough for people to imagine just how unimaginably cruel it was, not to mention that it would be inflicted onto a live person. She was such a weak and petite-sized woman. How could she possibly endure that kind of a torment? You must be the devil himself. Do you think that you will be able to strike at the gods' race like this? That will just be pure wishful thinking. When one heir dies, the gods' race can very well just groom a second one. All it takes will just be a little more time. Do not think for a moment that by doing this, the gods' race will be humiliated by this. Rest assured, princess, we will definitely make them pay for all the aggrievement you've suffered, so you can go in peace, as the gods' race will forever remember you. She could no longer hear all the voices filling up her ears as she had already grown numb to all of it. Do you see? It's just laughable that not a single one among them is sincerely seeking to save you. People of the gods' race are able to proclaim themselves as gods only because they are better at pretending than the demon race, and are able to hide the filthy, rotting hearts under the saintly and holy flesh shells they cloak themselves with so well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You, the man said softly to the woman beside her. She really did not know why he would say those words to her. Didn't he say he would kill her? Why has he still not made any move? And just as her mind was caught in a chaotic turmoil of thoughts, she suddenly sensed a terrifying power that was filled with unbridled bloodlust and resolute and unswerving murder lunging straight towards her, so ferociously quick that she did not even have time to dodge away at all. And her body just stood there still and unmoving, frozen stiff in place without giving off the slightest bit of temperature, because the power she sensed was one that felt so highly familiar. Chapter 306. 1. From now onwards, you are him. It was her father. Having faced each other so closely for such a long period of time, she had grown to become highly familiar with her father's powers. And this menacingly powerful force lunging straight towards her was seeking to take her life, without the slightest hesitation. Probably, right from the very beginning, her father had groomed her and shown her so much favor only because she was the most outstanding one among all his daughters, and would become the most useful one to him. Blood ties and kinship. Sigh. What is that? That meant the absolute least to the gods' race. Before self-interest, anything and everything can be sacrificed. And she had still been anticipating. She did not dodge, neither did she want to dodge. Just let it all end. The corners of her lips curved up into a faint smile, and she closed her eyes as if she was waiting for the sweet release of death. In that instant, two voices suddenly sounded in her ears. One filled with panic and terror, carrying pain and disbelief in its tone, while the other voice was still as cold and heartless as before. But for some unknown reason, she could somehow detect a faint sliver of concern in the second voice. A lethal and powerful finishing strike from the highest and most supreme entity in the gods' race. Even if one was fortunate enough to survive, they would not be able to live for very much longer. Moreover, it was a strike that had come like a bolt out of the blue, which caught everyone completely off guard. The expected pain and agony did not come, but the tumultuous noises she had heard in her ears suddenly fell deathly silent, and the air grew so heavy and oppressive it was getting rather hard to breathe. What has happened? She slowly opened her eyes, and she saw that there seemed to be a shadowy figure filling her sight, and it was impossible for her to see clearly for an instant. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She struggled to force her eyes wide open in order to see, and discovered the very person who had always remained by her side all this time, despite the fact that he knew that she was merely making use of him, shielding her as he stood right in front of her, his thin and lean figure seeming exceptionally tall and towering right at that moment. That handsome countenance of his was smiling at her like always, but there was some sort of a warm liquid, droplets that dripped onto her face. One of the droplets fell right at the corner of her eye, and she lifted a hand to wipe it away, coming to discover that her fingers were stained bright red. The look on her face was blank as she lifted her head up in a daze, as she saw a large gaping hole in the man's chest, precise and exact, right where his heart had been. Her lips quivered in utter helplessness, and something seemed to well up from inside her eyes, blurring her vision. He's merely just an ordinary human, but he had used his own body of flesh and blood to shield her, even though it would not have any effect. Chapter 306. 2. From now onwards, you are him no effect at. Wait. that weak and frail body of a human. How could it possibly block such a powerful and lethal strike? She wiped her eyes clear, and when she looked again, she seemed to notice something else. Behind the man, there was another person standing there, similarly putting up a defensive stance where he stood, where she was only able to see the wide and resolute back of the person. She could not see the expression on the person's face, and was unable to tell if he was hurt. But how could he possibly not be hurt in this situation? With the two people shielding her, she did not even suffer a single scratch. The man standing in between had his heart shot right through behind the first person shielding them, taking in all the damage from the remaining power of the blocked strike, the force completely dissipated by the time it reached her. That would mean that the person in front must have withstood a much larger portion of the damage alone, maybe even more than that. However, the man still stood in his spot with his back straight and unyielding, not moving a single inch. She was suddenly a little afraid, to the extent that her heart skipped a beat. Her voice came out incredibly hoarse, not caring if the man was going to show her the same expression of disdain at that moment. She called out his name. Lian Shi. A name that people of the gods race were most bothered by. To think that the leader of the demon race, whose cultivation was so powerful and unfathomable, would possess such a pleasing and melodious-sounding name, like one that would belong to a proud and revered celestial being from beyond the 9 heavens, or to a pious holy disciple that received Buddha's teachings of the Sanskrit right before Buddha himself. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, but that name should not, in all circumstances, belong to an evil being from the vile demon race. The man with the well-built figure seemed to have heard someone call out to him as he slowly came to turn around. But the moment his body turned, it immediately caused crystalline tears to flow down the woman's face. There was the slightest shade of color on the man's handsome countenance. As people from the demon race were born to live in dark and sunless places, their complexion was fairer than others, but it wasn't the same frightful paleness she saw on the man at that moment. However, that was not what pained the woman's heart the most, but it was the pair of usually deeply mesmerizing violet eyes of his, which at that moment had turned red like blood. Upon looking more closely, she then saw that his eyes had not merely turned red, but were actually bleeding inside, together with a trickle of blood that could be seen flowing down from the corner of his mouth. The man just stood there, staring at her without saying a single word, watching the woman sob till she was unable to speak, her thin, slender body shaking incessantly, so overcome with grief she just could not control herself, unable to stop. Chapter 306. 3. From now onwards, you are him, Lian Shi. Are you alright? You're scaring me. Seeing her in that state, the man was silent for a moment, the expression on his face a little helpless. He then walked slowly over, stopping right in front of her and lowering himself down in a crouch. What are you crying for? His voice did not sound strange or different, but carried a crisp melodious tenor, which just caused the woman's tears to flow down in torrents. She then said in between sobs, "Your eyes." "It's all right." The man clicked his tongue, and his gaze turned to look at the man who had a large gaping hole in his chest, who did not seem to be breathing anymore. His expression seemed to turn a little conflicted as he said in an indifferent voice, "He really cared about you. What a great pity. I lost this time. To think that I lost to a human in speed. He is really more suited to be with you than I am." The man stretched out his hand, his actions looking like he was seeking to gently wipe away the tears on the woman's face. However, the woman's body tensed up, and her eyes flared wide in disbelief. So there are moments he can be so gentle? And that was when he was faced with her, a person he abhorred so much. Could it be? He doesn't really hate her that much deep in his heart? Otherwise, why would he say something like this now? "I can save him." The man uttered out those words all of a sudden, his eyes looking straight at her. "How are you going to save him?" the woman asked, her brows furrowing up in puzzled bewilderment. She did not manage to get a response from the man, because in the very next instant, she came to know what sort of method he was going to use to save the man. With a smile on his face, He curled his fingers up into claws and dug his hand right into his own chest. Immediately, a violet light burst forth from his chest, the scorching and blinding light stinging her eyes. Lian Shi, her voice was almost breaking from terror. Has he gone nuts? Does he know how important his demon heart is to him? Does he even know what he is doing at all? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Why would he go save a human who is totally unrelated to him? Even though the human had died because he wanted to save her, so what? That was a debt she owes. Why did he have to be the one to pay? Have you lost your mind? Stop that now. Stop it right now. She was frantically trying to go stop him, but all of that was already too late. The man had suddenly dug out his demonic heart and then plunged his hand into the gaping hole in the human's chest to fill it up. In what seemed to be just a blink of an eye, the mortal wound in the human's chest had healed, and not a single mark could be seen on the flawless, unblemished skin. Chapter 306. For, from now onwards, you are him. The man's head of inky black hair turned snowy white, the blood-red irises from before slowly assuming a faint violet shade, but not the slightest sliver of spiritedness could be detected from his body anymore. He looked at the woman's highly dazed look and smiled slightly. Do not overthink it too much. I am not that big-hearted or gracious, but it is merely because he can still be saved while I do not have any way of reversing this situation anymore. I was born into the demon race, but you probably did not know that my mother was actually once from the god's race, but because she came to fall in love with a person from the demon race and was sentenced to the most cruel punishment. She was hated and scorned by each and everyone. Not a single person was willing to plead for her. All of them just could not wait to have her killed to be rid of her. In the end, I was not even able to save the tiniest bit of her primordial spirit essence. That is why I hate every single person from the god's race so much, as the blood that flows in their bodies are even more cold-blooded and venomous than any one of us in the demon race. They are the most hypocritical race throughout the entire world, and I made a pledge to myself that as long as I remain alive, the demon race and the god's race shall forever be at odds. I seek to kill every single person from the god's race down to their very last man, to make them suffer the very same intolerable and deadly pain. Speaking up to that point, his voice paused for a moment. Seemingly a little contemptuous, his gaze then slowly turned towards her. But why must you turn out to be the lone exception? Within all that filth and scourge that the god's race is, you are so clean and pristine, like a flower that is yet to weather through any storms, the unspoiled purity still preserved in your heart. I've said before that we can never be together. That is not because I hate you, but inversely, it is because I love you. The woman's irises contracted greatly, unable to believe that she would actually hear such words coming out from the man's mouth. He had said that he loves her. Is she dreaming? You're so pristine and untainted, whereas I am unworthy. He said he was unworthy. Unworthy to have someone as good as her, and unworthy to have her fall so low, to lose all her dignity in loving him. The person who should already be dead came back to life. At that point, it seemed he was still an outsider, a mere passerby in their lives. Even the fact that his life had been extended was because it was stolen from someone else. That man disappeared after that. It was not known how much he said to the woman before his body began to turn more and more fuzzy into a blur, to finally become a hazy image of a lotus bloom. The image appeared only for a highly brief instant, and dispersed into the wind in a fine powder, disappearing without leaving a single trace behind. So it turned out that he was not truly a demon. Half of the blood in his body was actually of the god's races, and his mother was actually a lotus bloom that grew in the pond within the god's race territories, who assumed human form after 1,000 years' cultivation. But her life had been so short and fleeting. And now, it was the same with her son, disappearing completely from the world. But he had not forgotten the silent words the man had said to him before he dissipated into the wind. Protect her well. Sigh. He had known it for a very long time, that it wasn't that the man did not love her, but he had actually loved her so oppressively, much too deeply, and he only dared to say it out aloud at the moment just before his death. And how was it any different for him? He had only been lying to himself all along. He looked at the woman who stood there frozen in place, not moving an inch. From the moment that the man disappeared, something in her had seemed different. He walked over to her and patted her gently on the shoulder. What came to meet his eyes were a pair of eyes that were icy cold, without the slightest bit of emotion in them. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. When she turned to look at him, her expression looked dazed and completely blank for a moment. In the woman's pair of crystalline clear silver eyes, he could see himself reflected in them. With very familiar-looking violet eyes. Lian Shi. The woman's voice called out softly. What? He was stunned with surprise. From today onwards, you are Lian Shi. Chapter 307. 1. A path to life or to death. At this point, the tale finally came to an end. Qingyu also finally understood why this man had always given her the feeling he was rather self-contradictory. There was clearly a kind of clean purity about the guy that made him seem to be untainted by the mortal world, but there were also times that his actions reflected a sinister and evil side of him. That was because in his body, another soul lay hidden that enabled him to have his life extended, an existence that was highly crucial and important. She also finally understood why his eyes always carried an inextinguishable sadness inside, or to put it more accurately, those eyes did not belong to him, but to another lonely and sad soul who is not willing to leave. That woman in the story, who is she? Qingyu then asked in a soft voice. Lian Shi's eyes looked down slightly and said in an emotionless voice, "She is the only god that still lives from those millions of years ago till now, the Lord of the Mind-Free Peak." The expression on Qingyu's face was not all that surprised, as if she had already guessed it. From the story you told, I was already able to guess it, and the reason for all these things that the woman is doing now. She must have changed to become someone even you are no longer able to recognize, isn't it? All this time, you've just been that man's substitute. Right. Substitute. Lian Shi laughed softly. Even though I know that to be the case, I could never bear to refuse her, willing to carry all the sin myself and have blood on my hands rather than her. She used to have such a clean and pure soul, but she is now just a little too tired and merely feels that the world is too cold a place right now. And the two people she had cared the most about, her father had abandoned her, while the man who loved her had died in order to protect her. There was probably nothing that could come to devastate her any more than that, right? Seeing how self-delusional the man was, Qingyu's brows knitted up, a little hesitant and feeling rather sympathetic, but she still went ahead to speak the truth that the man was seemingly not entirely willing to accept. She seeks to resurrect that Lian Shi. Am I right? The man kept his eyes lowered, and they seemed to blink a few times weakly. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. But do you know that if that Lian Shi comes back to life, you will then cease to exist? She will then not even remember you. Not remember that there was once someone who never ever left her side in her life, a person who loved her more than his own life. The ends of Lian Shi's lips curled up slightly, seemingly a little self-mocking as he said, "So what? If that is what she wants, I will do everything I can to help her. The past 1,000,000 years that I've lived was stolen anyway. Or it was just charity that was given to me by that man." After saying that, a warm and friendly smile slowly came to show on Lian Shi's face, his gaze looking at Qingyu seemingly a lot more gentle. He then said, "I do not know why, but all these things have laid buried deep in my heart for so many years, and I have never brought it up to anyone before, but I have somehow come to share it with you today. You are really quite an amazing little lass, you know." Chapter 307. 2. A path to life or to death. Qingyu was a little taken aback before she laughed out helplessly. Can that really be considered to be praise? Even though that is the case, it is already destined that you will not be able to escape. Actually, the legend about the Mind-Free Peak came about from misconceptions being piled upon more misconceptions. All these years, What the mind-free peak seeks has never been highly skilled pugilists, but for a suitable catalyst to revive that man. And I am that catalyst? Originally, your mother was the most suitable candidate. But unfortunately, just as she was growing to be able to give off the greatest effect to it, the chastity of her body was broken by someone, and she lost all her value. The plan that had taken 1,000 years to prepare had to be temporarily shelved. Speaking up till that point, Lianshur could not help but look at her with a meaningful glance. Throughout all the realms, we were unable to find a single person who possessed the mutated flame element, and your mother was an extremely rare exception. Never have I ever thought that you would turn out to be even more well-suited to be the catalyst we sought, as the flame element in your body is so utterly pure and clean, completely unspoiled, the very best choice there is. Qingyu listened to those words in silence, and a long while passed before she looked up at him with incomprehension in her eyes. Why would you tell me all this? Lianshur paused for a moment before he laughed softly and said, It is probably because I find it such a great pity that from then onwards, the world would no longer have such an interesting soul like you in existence anymore. Interesting? Then I must really feel highly honored. Qingyu scoffed, as she broke out into a soft, mocking laugh. Lianshur was not bothered by the scorn in her tone, but merely narrowed his eyes, slightly smilingly. All right then. I should go take a look at all those people already. They would probably have reached the place they were meant to go to by now. Upon saying that, he turned himself around and was going to leave. Qingyu suddenly felt a twitch tug between her brows for no reason, and she quickly called out, Hey, wait. The only response to her was the slowly disappearing figure of the man. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qingyu sighed out helplessly. For some unknown reason, she suddenly had a bad feeling. She didn't even know whether that little meatball was able to find little Belle or not, as she had not seen any sign of the youth on the screen earlier. Flame-devouring ice demon. Because orders had come down from the top that nothing must happen to Qinglan Fei now, Yanpe relaxed his guard towards the woman a little, which allowed Inge to come more frequently these few days, and was able to escape notice. Hearing the soft patter of light footsteps, Qinglan Fei turned her gaze over to look. Seeming to have guessed who the person was, the expression on her face was not all that surprised when she sighed softly and said, Inge, I've said that you do not need to come here anymore. Chapter 307. 3. A Path to Life or to Death, Senior. Those people have come, but unfortunately, many of them lost their lives. Inge said in a low voice, her tone grave. Qinglan Fei was slightly taken aback. Who is here? There are many of them, including people whom you care about, Inge said, as she waved her hand lightly through the air. An image immediately appeared before her, and a familiar figure slowly came to be revealed. But he seemed to be moving alone by himself, as there was no other person beside him. And the place he was at looked strange and unfamiliar to Qinglan Fei, who did not know what kind of a place it was even though she had lived in the Mind-Free Peak for a number of years in the past. Jingyu. Qinglan Fei's hands subconsciously clenched up, and a tinge of worry came to fill her eyes. Why has he come? And how did he manage to find this place? Why isn't he with little Belle and the others? Is he doing this without any of the others knowing anything about it? It's not just him, Inge went on to say, and her hand waved through the air again. Qingbei's face that had several streaks of blood on it then appeared on the screen, his expression nervous, like he was hiding from something, and his situation did not look highly optimistic. They're all searching for you, Inge said with a serious face as she looked at Qinglan Fei. Senior, now that these people are here, the security at some places would inadvertently loosen slightly. This is the best time for you to leave here. Qinglan Fei looked startled. Leave. I told you that I will help you. Ing's sweet and pretty face was resolute as she gripped Qinglan Fei's hands tightly, and she then saw the chains bound around her wrists start to melt bit by bit. In the span of a few breaths, the bindings have disappeared completely. Having been shackled under those heavy bonds for such a long period, Qinglan Fei found herself a little unused to the feeling of having her hands freed. But what surprised her even more was what Inge had just done. Have you lost your mind? If Master finds out. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. But before she could even finish, she saw Inge use the same method to dissolve the chains around her ankles. Let's go. Inge helped her up gently, letting the still weakened Qing Lanfei lean her full weight onto her as they made their way towards the exit a step at a time. There was naturally someone keeping watch over the flame-devouring ice demon, and when they saw Inge bringing someone out, they quickly went up to stop her with a wary look on his face. With a calm, cool face, she said in an expressionless voice, Deity Yanpe gave his orders that this person must not die as yet and is to be given elixirs to prolong her life. The flame-devouring ice demon is not a suitable place to nurse her, and I was sent here to bring her to the deity's residence. Chapter 307. For a path to life or to death. The person guarding the place saw how composed she was, and there was no sign of her being flustered in any way. Turning to look at the highly weakened woman who looked like she was on the verge of death, and seeing the fact that Inge was deity Yanpe's direct disciple, he thought the whole thing sounded rather plausible. Giving it a thought for another moment, the guard then nodded his head slightly and let her pass. Qing Lanfei had leaned on the girl's shoulder throughout the entire scenario, her eyes wide as she watched the whole thing, and was unable to utter a single word. Inge was afraid that the woman might get too nervous and come to give the game away, so she sealed her movement acupoint, besides leaning weakly on her as she shuffled along. The woman was unable to do anything else. So the two of them slowly left the frightening place that the flame-devouring ice demon was, away from that terrifying prison. Not even in her dreams would Qing Lanfei ever imagine that she would be able to see the light of day again. But she did not know for how long that moment would last, as she expected that she would be discovered very quickly and would be recaptured in no time at all. This time, she has really dragged Inge down with her. It was not known how long they had walked before Inge released the sealed acupoint on her body and said, "Now go quickly." She raised a hand and pointed a finger before her, towards a tiny path that was filled with vegetation covered in white needle-shaped leaves. Just go straight from here. This is a place that the Mind-Free Peak is unable to watch over, and no one will know about this. To some people, this can be a path that leads to life, a way out from here, but also a path that leads to certain death for others. After Inge said that, she turned to look at Qing Lanfei and said, "But I believe that Senior is always someone whom luck smiles upon all the time, and you will definitely be able to turn calamity into blessings." Qing Lanfei's fingers tightened up into fists, a crease knitting up her brows as she said haltingly, "Inge, I can't leave." The guard at the flame-devouring ice demon had seen that it was Inge who brought her out of the place. When they came to discover that the girl had let her escape, she really could not imagine the consequences the girl would come to face. The punishment the Mind-Free Peak metes out to traitors is unimaginably cruel, and she cannot be so selfish. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Although she was really worried about Jingyu and the others, how could she possibly throw her junior, whom she grew up with together, into such horrible danger? Why are you still hesitating? Inge became a little anxious, and she stretched her hands out to push the woman. Better go right now. When they discover something is amiss, you will then be unable to leave. Qing Lanfei's feet staggered for a moment, but she still shook her head stubbornly. I am not leaving. If I leave, you will die. My death means nothing at all. It's just one life after all. Inghe laughed a little self-mockingly. If not for how Senior had protected me back in those years, with the unlikable personality I have, I would have already died a countless number of times. Now that I can save you with my life in exchange, just take it as repayment for the debt I've owed you for so many years. Chapter 308. 1. Senior, you must go on to live a good life. Qing Lanfei's body stiffened up. She seemed to realize something suddenly after she heard those words. The shade on her face then changed slightly as her eyes widened incredulously in disbelief. Inge, has your intentions right from the very beginning been to give up your own life? As the words to Qing Lanfei's question sounded out, Inga seemed to become startled, and the corner of her mouth twitched momentarily. She lowered her eyes in helplessness, and then said, "Senior, don't probe any further. You promised me before that you will go on to live a happy life, together with my share of happiness." Immediately after she said that, without even waiting for Inga to respond, a gentle force spilled out from Ingji's palm that softly pushed the woman deep into where the tiny path led to. Qing Lanfei's cultivation had not fully recovered, and it happened when her guard was down, so she was pushed back a few hundred meters as Inga watched the figure of the woman slowly grow smaller bit by bit. "Inga, what audacity! You actually dared to let her go." A highly infuriated voice suddenly sounded from a distance away, and the expression on Qing Lanfei's face froze. It was her master, deity Yan Po's voice. "She has been discovered so quickly?" Qing Lanfei turned her head in fright to look, and saw Yan Po with about 10 highly skilled experts behind her. A sharp command from Yan Po in a cold, icy voice quickly sent those figures darting out immediately, lunging straight towards Qing Lanfei, in quick pursuit of the escaped fugitive. However, Inga was a step ahead as she went to block their way forward and gathered all her power in her to weave an enormous web, stopping the experts in their tracks. Her face became incredibly pale, and it seemed like it was taking a great toll on her. However, she gritted her teeth and shouted out with all her might, "Run!" Qing Lanfei clenched up her fists, and she was still hesitating when a bout of bone-chilling laughter broke out in contempt, and Yan Po's voice then rang out in a completely emotionless tone. "Great. This is just great. What deep bonds of sisterhood you two share. I have really underestimated you, it seems, seeing that you are always quiet as a mouse and always so obedient. I had not thought that you can actually be so bold. Have you ever considered the consequences of your actions here? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yu Ingo knows that what she did is unpardonable, and I only hope that Master will spare Senior just this once, on account of the fact that she was once your disciple." Inga spoke slowly, pausing at each word that came out of her mouth. A sliver of blood trickled slowly down from a corner of her lips. With just her powers alone, she was stretched to her limits, having to hold back so many highly skilled pugilists, and she would not be able to sustain it very much longer, but she would never give up. Until the very absolute last moment, the scorn on Yan Po's face grew deeper. "Since you're still unrepentant, persisting in the error of your ways even when death is upon you, there is no need for me to keep you with me any longer." Chapter 308. 2. "Senior, you must go on to live a good life." Upon saying that, Yan Po gave her sleeves a grand flick, which pushed the whole group of people aside. Her long, slender fingers then reached out in a grab, effortlessly coming to grasp Ingji's neck in their grip. Ingji's face immediately turned red as the most fragile part of her slender neck was caught in her master's grip, completely defenseless against it. But her eyes were moist, carrying a tinge of plea within as she looked at Yan Po and said strugglingly, "Master, I beg you." Yan Po did not answer her. A loud crack snapped out crisply, and the girl's body fell limply to the ground. In that seemingly unending, boundless, snowy ground, her red scarlet cloves fluttered lightly in the wind, a beautifully brilliant sight. But there she would lie, seemingly never to wake again. Qing Lanfei stood frozen in her spot, her body turned cold, without the slightest bit of temperature on her body. Her arms hung limply at her sides, the tips of her fingers shaking. A chill spread out from deep inside her bones, permeated her entire body, that almost seemed to rob her of her ability to think for an instant, unable to move in the slightest at all. Inga. It was not known how much time had passed. It looked like her lips had turned rather pale under that freezing cold temperature. But what had become colder than that was her heart, that wrenched up with a throbbing, wincing pain. Just how fleeting can a person's fragile life be? It was just a short moment ago that that person had still been smiling at her. She was at this moment lying motionless there on the cold, hard ground, no longer breathing, and so quiet that it looked like she was merely asleep. But Qing Lanfei knew that the girl would never awaken again. Inge. She should still be well and alive. Why? Her fingernails dug deeply into her palms, and blood seeped out from her tightly clenched fists. But she did not feel the slightest bit of that pain, her eyes filling up with hatred as she stared at the woman who had an icy expression on her face. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yushi had always thought that though the Mind-Free Peak had always been a cold and heartless place, but her master was different at the very least, a person who was never prone to smiles and had a frosty personality, but would always show her a sliver of concern. But she had gotten it all wrong. The concern her master had shown her all this time was merely because Yenpa had a scheme up her sleeve all along, and that she was still of some use to her. Now, even with Inge, the one and only person in the Mind-Free Peak who still had her conscience in her heart, the one person who had been sincere towards her, has now been ruthlessly murdered. What wrong has Inge committed? She was innocent and absolutely guiltless. A smile slowly crept onto Qing Lanfei's face before she then broke into a bout of sad, mournful laughter. From now onwards, you are no longer my master. In your heart, I fear that both Inge and I are not even considered as worthy chess pieces for you to maneuver, but just little playthings kept by your side, to be used and manipulated as you very well please. Chapter 308. 3. Senior, you must go on to live a good life. What? You're crying out an injustice for her? She helped you escape, and that is a betrayal to the Mind-Free Peak. For me to let her die a painless death like that is already the last bit of benevolence and mercy I can show her as her master. Yen Po's face darkened as she looked at that utterly dispassionate expression on the woman, like her heart had been burnt to ashes and could no longer feel, and went on to continue to speak. That is just preposterous. An ironic smile then came onto Qing Lanfei's face, her expression resolute. Since that is the case, would I accept that to be my fate? Even if I am to die here today, I will never go with all of you. Upon saying that, Qing Lanfei's body was already speedily moving deeper into the tiny path, disappearing from sight in the blink of an eye. Yen Po's gaze flashed with a sharp glint, her expression turning a little flustered. Stop her quickly. Do not let her reach there. The group of more than 10 men immediately plunged into quick and speedy pursuit when they heard that. On another end, Lu Junyao and his people had managed to dodge disaster as those spirit beasts who were sealed in ice only stirred some time after they passed the area, breaking out from their ice prisons to attack the people. And those spirit beasts did not seem to know exhaustion, like they had an inexhaustible amount of power. Some of the people ended up being devoured by the spirit's beasts as food when their energy gave out, till they were lucky enough to discover a door in the end. They pushed the door open to go in to hide, and saw that the spirit beasts seemed to be helpless against it, unable to get themselves in, and the spirit beasts' attacks then slowly subsided. Looking around at the people in there, where there was close to 100 people in the beginning, barely 20 people could be counted at that moment. The Darklands had a total of 5 people besides Lu Junyao himself, and they had lost one of their members. The Hunters Guild had probably fared the worst. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. They had brought the greatest number of men, and besides Zhuge Xiong himself, there was only one subordinate to be seen, who had half an arm bitten off by the spirit beasts, the wound haphazardly bandaged after the bleeding was staunched, looking barely alive as he laid there unmovingly. If not for the faint rise and fall of the man's chest as he breathed, people would have thought that he was dead. They were all there in the same place now after experiencing a life and death battle, and they did not have the heart to continue to fight anymore. The most important thing at this moment now was to stay alive. The air in there suddenly became rather oppressive and suffocating. Young lord, what should we do next? The woman with her long slanted fringe covering one of her eyes asked in a hoarse and raspy voice. Chapter 308. 4. Senior, You must go on to live a good life. Qing Li stood leaning back in a corner and did not say anything, his eyes dark as he threw a measuring gaze at the surroundings around them, seemingly thinking where the exit out of this place could be. The pretty and adorable-looking little girl had her eyes wide as she pressed herself against the wall in curiosity, feeling around here and knocking lightly there, looking like she was searching to see if there was some kind of a switch somewhere. Meatball also stuck its tiny little head out from within Lu Junyao's bosom, its nose wrinkled up as it sniffed the air. How is it, Meatball? Do you know how we can get ourselves out of this place? Qing Bei could not help but ask the little thing, when he saw the calm and unperturbed demeanor of the tiny little pudgy ball. However, Meatball merely turned its startlingly deep blue eyes around, before its head drooped down sadly as it said in an aggrieved voice, "I'm hungry." With a hopeful and expectant face, when Qing Bei heard that response, a twitch immediately tugged at the corner of his mouth. Feeling a little helpless, Qing Bei then said, "Meatball, we are now caught in such a critical situation. Can't you endure it for a while? Wait till we are out of danger and have saved your mother Qingyu before you eat, will you? You'll be able to eat as much as you want at that time." This little rascal really just can't kick that gluttonous nature it has, isn't it? Moreover, even if it was really hungry, there is nothing here for it to eat, right? They don't even know if they will be able to find a way out at all. But if I am hungry, I will not be able to find where the exit is, as my nose will not work well, Meatball said sadly as it hung its head. When those words came out, Sun Luo could not help but laugh out loud. Is that even true? A little thing like you has such an amazing ability? And it will not work anymore when you become hungry? Humph. Of course, that's the truth. I am not something that any regular spirit beast can compare to. Meatball exclaimed indignantly as it glared at the man. But then the problem is this, Sun Luo said as he spread his palms out. Although all of us here would have prepared some things kept in our dimensional spaces, but people who reach the levels we are at would be able to abstain from food for a long period of time, so we don't really have the habit of bringing food with us. Hearing that, Meatball's eyes widened in disbelief. There is really no food? Mother always kept many things to eat with her, and it would be fine even if it were to remain in her dimensional space for a year, without coming out from there. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Why would all these people here not have that same good habit? Just as Meatball was devastated with disappointment, the clear, pleasing voice of a man suddenly rang out. "Little one, come here. I have something for you to eat here." As the man's voice sounded, everyone's eyes turned to look, especially the group of people with Lu Junyao. In the end, when their gaze fell onto the source of that voice, they could clearly see that it had come from that tall figure in the corner, with green eyes and silver hair, his countenance so exquisite like he had walked out from a painting, the man who was Qing Li. He slowly lowered himself down into a crouch, his eyes meeting the wary and doubtful gaze of the little spirit beast, a slight curve at the very corners of his lips. Chapter 309. 1. Success in rescuing oneself. Back when little you and I would embark on training journeys together, there were times that we found ourselves trapped somewhere by accident and were unable to get out. Qing Li's voice was calm and soothing, as his long fair fingers waved in the air to produce a small, exquisite basket filled with all kinds of tempting food. There were delicious dainty snacks in there, together with some dry rations that were a little more filling. He then seemed to recall something interesting in his mind as a faint smile rose up to show on his cold, hard face as he spoke. There are times I get trapped in a place for several days straight, and I get so hungry my mind gets dizzy. So I learned from then on to always prepare some food at all times whenever I come out, to prepare myself for a situation such as this. Although that was what he said, in reality, he had kept such a habit for so many years not for his own sake, but for the sake of Qing Yu. Qing Tianlin, standing on the other side, could not help but narrow his eyes. Humph! Is that scoundrel boasting about how close he is with Qing? Lu Junyao's violet eyes flashed with a glint, and it was impossible to tell what he was thinking, but had surely noted that down deep in his heart. The man still has not given up till now, his heart always thinking of a certain little fox. Looks like when things here come to an end, preparations for some things need to be brought forward. If he does not stamp his mark on that alluring little lass, heaven knows how many more pesky flies she is going to attract. But as a spirit beast who would die if it did not eat, Meatball really did not consider so many things like these complicated humans, but just had its sparkling eyes that were shining so brightly fixated unwaveringly upon the food in front, and there was no need to mention just how adorable it looked at that moment. Seeing that, Qingbei could not help but stretch his hand out to stroke the little beast's tiny head before saying, "Meatball, he is a friend of Elder Sis, and is one of us. You can set your mind at ease and go ahead and eat." Regardless of what Qingyi Li's identity was at that moment, he was after all still the first person he came to admire growing up, and Qingbei had once vowed that he would become someone as strong and powerful as the man. Hence, Qingbei's impression of the man was still positive and very good. Seeming to be delighted by the words, "one of us," Qingyi Li's expression warmed up by quite a bit as he nodded his head at Qingbei. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You having gained Qingbei's approval, all of Meatball's concerns immediately evaporated. Its two tiny paws quickly grabbed up a bunch of the food and started gobbling them down, its cheeks full and bulging, making its tiny head more rotund than ever. In that quiet space, only the sound of the little beast's ravenous chewing could be heard as he chomped down on the delicious food. In mere moments, the food in the basket had been swept clean. It was not known how such a tiny stomach could fit so much inside. "Little one, had your fill already? Isn't it about time that you can find where the exit is now?" Seeing that the little beast had finally stopped, Sun Luo could not help but smile and ask out loud. Chapter 309. 2. Success in rescuing oneself. Meatball's large innocent eyes turned around and saw everyone looking at it with expectant gazes. It shook its tiny body to shake off the food crumbs and then nonchalantly took a couple of steps towards a certain direction, sniffing tentatively around for a moment before its tiny body took off like a released arrow. In that dimly lit space, the little beast raised its paws up high and then seemed to let out a cold flash of light. The moment that blinding flash passed, two soft clicks were heard, and a cross pattern showed up on the wall in front as they collapsed outwards. Everyone was instantly stunned by what they saw. Looking at that little beast who was no bigger than their palm, their impression of the little creature's ability immediately greatly improved. This little thing here. Just what manner of a monster is it? There were so many of them here, and not a single person among them was able to find a way out of this damned place. But this little beast here had just waved its tiny paws. And their ordeal is all over? What are those paws made out of? Why are all of you still standing there in a daze? Aren't you all in a hurry to get out of here? Meatball asked with a quizzical look in its eyes, before its tiny body went ahead to walk out from there. Everyone then seemed to snap back to their senses, hastily following behind to make their way out as well. Qingbei was following right behind. Up till now, the expression on his face was still one of utter disbelief. The little fella had stayed at Qinyu's side for quite a period now, and this was the first time that he discovered that the little one had such great abilities. It was probably because the little fellow was always acting so tame and adorably docile with Qinyu that he had come to mistakenly form the wrong impression that it was just an ordinary spirit pet. It was truly a case of hiding a light under a bushel. Now that they were out of that tight and closed-up space, it made certain things a lot more convenient. For example, Qingbei was now able to employ his supernatural senses to search for the locations that his mother and Qinyu were hidden in. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. But he had just thrown out his senses when something happened that caused his face to change in shade. "What's wrong?" Lu Junyao could not help but ask when he saw the color on the youth's face suddenly change. Qingbei was silent for a while, before he said in a sad and depressed voice, "Mother's aura is gone, and I am completely unable to find Qinyu's location. Could something have happened to your perceptive abilities?" Qingbei's brows furrowed up. That's impossible. Unless there is something that is able to impede and block out my senses, it is not possible that I am not able to detect a single sliver of their aura, and they are most definitely still here in this place. I'm afraid the interference at the place they are hidden in is way beyond my capability to overcome. Chapter 309. 3. Success in rescuing oneself. There are indeed such places here in existence here in the mind-free peak, where you won't be able to detect the slightest sliver of life in there at all. That is because there is a very well-concealed protective barrier covering the exterior of those places that isolates them from all kinds of powers. Little Monster's voice rang out with indifferent nonchalance. But the matter-of-factly tone he took to state that unexpectedly drew the attention of everyone else there. It seemed like that guy knew a lot about many things here in the mind-free peak right from the beginning, as if he had gone to all those places himself before. If they had not known that the guy was from the Darklands, they might really start to suspect whether he could be a spy sent by the mind-free peak. However, the schemes he had devised were all to help everyone, and he was one of the leading strategists among the Darklands members. For someone to be able to gain the favor of Lu Junyao, a man who deemed everything to be beneath him, Little Monster was definitely not an ordinary person. After hearing what Little Monster said, then it must be true. Lu Junyao's gaze paused for a moment as he turned to look at Meatball, who had stopped a short distance from his feet, and he then asked the little creature, "How is it, little one? Have you managed to determine the direction we should take?" He had not even finished the rest of his words when he discovered the reason that had caused the little beast to stop in its tracks. Right before them was a scattered mess with great piles of snow everywhere, sharp icicles littered across the ground all over the place. A highly chaotic scene, looking like a tremendous disaster, had just struck the place. Meatball was at that moment showing a rare moment of bewilderment on its face as it tilted its head and muttered, "An avalanche just swept over the place and has completely buried all the roads. I remember that I came through here to get to you people, but I am now unable to find that path. All signs of it erased." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU of all times for it to happen, an avalanche has to happen at such a moment. Little Monster's scarlet eyes were narrowed as he said that, the expression on his face looking thoughtful and profound. With the way forward sealed, without any alternative direction to be seen, everyone seemed to be faced with another difficult situation. The sky was gradually growing darker, heralding the coming of night. Qingyu really did not know how long she had been here in this prison that did not see the light of day at all. And when she came to open her eyes once more, she could feel that the power in her body had increased by quite a bit again. Like what Lianshi had said, the water in this pool was not harmful to her in any way, but would instead further elevate her cultivation. She had previously been at the Sacred Soul Burial Arts 7th level before this, and she had soared up to the 8th level's peak in a single leap. It was already at a higher level than what she had attained in her previous life, and she was even feeling faint signs of almost breaking through to the 9th level. Chapter 309. 4. Success in rescuing oneself. But she knew very well that breaking through to the 9th level would not be something easy, or she would not have only attained till the 8th level's middle stages at the point just before her death in her previous life, and breaking through beyond that would be even more demanding and arduous. And once she breaks through to the 9th level, this place would probably not be able to hold her anymore. But though she could feel that her cultivation had grown stronger by quite a bit, those things around her ankles were still things she was unable to free herself from. With her freedom being restricted for the first time like this and trapped in such a tight space without being able to move around, she was feeling rather helpless. The temperature in the mind-free peak was absolutely brutal, one that made a person feel a kind of stinging chill that seeps right into their bones and nothing else. A gust of icy cold wind blew in through a tiny window at one of the highest points in the prison, which immediately lowered the temperature in there by quite a bit. A few slender, thin, white needle-shaped leaves flew in through that window and fell onto the pool, floating quietly on the water's surface. Qingyu stretched her hand out to pick up a leaf and stared at it in puzzlement. What kind of a plant did this leaf come from? She has never seen something like this before. As an outstanding elixir cultivator, she would naturally need to be highly familiar with all kinds of plants and herbs, which was one of the most basic requirements. Many kinds of herbs were also highly similar to each other in many ways, and one could easily be mistaken with just the slightest bit of carelessness. But the leaf of this species of plant was highly unique, or at least till this day, she had never seen any species of plant that was similar to it. It was such a thin needle-shaped leaf, and looking more closely at it, the leaf even had a tiny saw-toothed edge. Qingyu reached a hand out very cautiously to go touch the saw-toothed edge, and ended up getting pricked by it, bright red blood immediately beading on her fingertip to drip into the water before disappearing from sight. Her eyes widened in surprise, seemingly not expecting that such a soft and flimsy leaf could actually prick through her skin. After the leaf pricked her finger and was stained with her blood, the originally pristine white leaf actually turned to become blood red, and its soft, supple texture actually became hard, strong as steel. Held in Qingyu's hand, it no longer felt like an ordinary leaf, but very much more like a razor blade that was as thin as a cicada's wings. For some unknown reason, as though she was possessed, she slowly sank as she submerged herself into the water to feel towards the bonds around her ankles, before she reached out and lightly sliced the thin leaf blade over her shackles. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You in that instant, unbelievably just like the incredulous thought running through her mind, she felt the heavy feeling around her feet suddenly disappear. She has broken free from those things. Uncontrollably, Qingyu's heart started to beat faster, and with a splash, she nimbly swam her way out from the pool of water and climbed up onto shore. There was a hidden switch on the prison door, and every time that Lianshi came in, she had seen him demonstrate it many times, knowing it very well in her heart. Lianshi had been so certain that she would not be able to escape from the place, and had never tried to hide it from her before. Chapter 310. 1. Snow blindness, and that was what gave her her best chance to escape. In the mere blink of an eye, her body slipped out to appear on the outside of that inescapable prison. Held in her palm, the strange and amazing leaf that had accidentally aided her in her escape then slowly melted down into water after she stepped out of the prison, flowing out through the gaps between her fingers. Qingyu stared in surprise at the leaf that had suddenly disappeared from her hand, and only came to laugh softly to herself after a while, thinking that the god of luck must have smiled on her out of the blue. She must now find her mother's location as fast as possible, but she did not have the slightest inkling where those people could have held her captive at all. The only thing she could be certain of was that it would be in a place that was as well hidden and concealed as where she was imprisoned. Thinking about that, she then summons Onmai out from the dimensional space together with the heavenly insights into medicine's book spirit. "Oh, my mistress, you've finally summoned me at long last." The little scarlet-red toddler was extremely delighted the moment he saw her, his big eyes sparkling like there were glittering stars in them, looking like he was all ready to leap right into her arms. Qingyu lifted up a corner of her eyebrow, and before the little toddler could even react, a hand had come to grab him by his collar, easily lifting him up into the air, unable to break free despite him struggling with all his might, his limbs flailing about in all directions. "Detestable scoundrel, let go of me right now. You're really just too much." The little toddler waved his paws around in indignant rage as he cried out loudly. The tall, slender, handsome golden-haired figure narrowed his attractive silver-golden eyes and then asked in a sarcastic tone, "So, I'm supposed to let you go to allow you to go attack my mistress?" When the little toddler heard that, he immediately gritted his teeth to say, "What do you mean by your mistress? This is clearly my mistress. You're really so shameless. Don't you know anything about priority in the order of arrival? I was already there, by my mistress' side before she was even born. Heaven knows where you were at that time." "How laughable. When Mistress was born, she did not even know of your existence at all. All this talk of priority given in the order of arrival. What right does a puny seed have to be making so much noise here? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You, the golden-haired youth said in a calm and composed manner, a striking contrast from the little toddler's indignant fury. What an ungrateful scoundrel you are. Have you forgotten who was the one that saved you? If not for me, you will still be good for nothing with a deficient soul now. Let's not be too hasty here and put things in perspective here. Even without you, I would still be able to restore my soul, which would just take a little more time. Don't you think you're overestimating yourself here? What a scoundrel. I shall challenge you to a duel here today. Ha! Who's afraid of you? Chapter 310. 2. Snow Blindness. Qingyu watched the two of them with an expressionless face. One a tall, handsome-looking youth, the other a red-haired brat in red clothes who looked no older than a child who was 4 or 5, the two of them arguing till their faces turned red with anger. Oh, it should be said that only the little brat was red-faced with anger, while Zhongmai was calm and unruffled throughout the entire episode. Just like an adult watching an unruly child throwing an unreasonable tantrum. An innocuous corner of Qinyu's eyebrow lifted up. Are these two here fighting over who is more of her affection? She had summoned them to get them to help find her mother. Why have they suddenly started quarreling like this instead? Seeing that the two of them were not showing any signs of stopping at all, Qinyu's voice sounded out softly. The two of you can continue. I'll be leaving first. The moment her voice fell, she did not even care to see the reactions of those two, but just turned and walked away. Zhongmai and the little toddler were immediately left staring at each other angrily for a moment, before they quickly made their way hastily to go apologize obediently to Qingyu. Mistress, we've realized our mistake. Please don't be angry with us. Qingyu then cast her angry gaze upon them, a soft snort of derision escaping through her nostrils. The two rascals knew that they were in the wrong and they remained silent, not daring to say another word. I was trapped in that place before this, and it restricted some of my abilities, making it impossible for me to summon you guys. It was only after such great difficulty that I managed to escape from the ordeal, and I really cannot afford to waste any more time. As Qingyu spoke, a golden red flame rose up in the middle of her palm. This is the flame element. Help me locate the person who possesses an aura like this, and I do not think locating a person will pose to be highly difficult for either of you, as your nose and other senses are very much more sensitive than mine. Rest assured, mistress. I will definitely find the person before him. The little toddler boasted with great confidence. Zhongmai scoffed in disdain. Do not be so full of yourself. You might just blow up. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. I am not a balloon. I am not some lowly, inanimate object like that. I am the great earth fire devil vine. Oh, I forgot. I had thought you were just a turf of moss and might just get eaten up by a lowly, insignificant animal. I am not moss. I am the greatest earth fire devil vine. The little toddler was so enraged he looked like he wanted to hit somebody. Seeing that the two rascals were going to butt heads once again, Qingyu's face immediately turned icy. Shut up. The two of them immediately clamped up. Chapter 310. 3. Snow Blindness. Since the two of you like to argue so much, let me give you both a mission now. Before nightfall, I need to at least get a strong and useful clue from either of you, and the loser among you two shall be punished by undergoing self-reflection in the dimensional space for an entire month, not allowed to take a single step outside. With those words from Qingyu delivered in a mildly threatening voice, the faces of the two rascals grew solemn. Locked up for an entire month. That would be brutal. It's so much more fun out here, and being locked up for so long away from this. When those thoughts came to mind, without even needing Qingyu to give them any further orders, The two of them quickly disappeared from sight in a blink, in silent competition against the other, to see who would be the one to lose their freedom and be trapped in the dimensional space for 1 whole month. Qingyu then chuckled to herself. Her ears finally able to enjoy some peace, she raised her eyes to peer into the distance, seeming like she had ascertained a direction to take. There were rows of tall towering trees some ways ahead, their trunks snowy white and their leaves similarly a pristine shimmering white. Under the sunlight, the reflection made the trees seem like they were filled with crystals, astoundingly beautiful. She approached them slowly, and then bent down slightly to pick up a leaf that had fallen to the ground, which was long and narrow in shape, and had a sharp, jagged, saw-toothed edge running along its side. It was that same strange and amazing leaf that had drifted in through the prison's narrow window and fallen into the pool of water, which aided her in her escape. Casting her gaze afar, she could see that these unique trees grew thickly and densely together, stretching a great distance, filling up the landscape. Qing Lanfei seemed to be lost, or she might have stumbled into an array. She did not know how long she had spent meandering along all the twisty turns and bends on the path she took in this place, under the thick foliage of this dense forest. Everything her eyes saw, no matter the flowers or shrubbery, or the animals roaming around or the birds that flew in the air. Even the occasional unremarkable rock or stone that appeared. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. They were all the same snowy white in color. Though she had lived in the Mind-Free Peak for a number of years before, and had often seen no lack of such a complete blanket of white, unable to see much of any other color. But this place was one she had never encountered before. She had stumbled in here by accident, and Inge had told her before she died that this path could either lead her out of here, or it could bring her to her death. If she was lucky enough to find her way out of here, she would be able to escape and live. And if she was unlucky and fails to find her way out of here, she might just be turned into a tree here in this place, or maybe a piece of stone, without anyone knowing a thing. The Mind-Free Peak was a divine realm, and it wasn't just a legend. Chapter 310. 4. Snow blindness. It was not a place that the bright moon divine temple could come to compare to, as this was a place where gods had really lived in 1,000 years ago. Even now, the Mind-Free Peak was still a place of deep, unfathomable mystery, as corpses or dead bodies would never exist here. Whenever any life form dies in here, their flesh bodies would cease to exist, dissipating into ash, or to turn into grass of flowers, their existence changing into another form. They would not truly die. In fact, they would still retain their consciousness. But in the eyes of outsiders, they would never know that the insignificant and unremarkable-looking blade of grass or tiny pebble was transformed from what was once a fresh and vigorous life form.
But she did not want to die like this.
She had promised Jingyu that she would not leave him again, and she had made a promise to little Bei that she would make it up to him for all the years of regret when she had not been by his side. And she had never even seen her daughter's face with her own eyes yet. She had heard that the little lass looked very much like her, and she must be a very smart, intelligent, and pretty-looking child. If she is unable to make it out of here in the end, that would be the biggest regret she would carry. In her mind, she thought that this place must surely pose great danger to those people from the Mind-Free Peak and contained many mysterious and unstable elements, or they would not have given up on their pursuit the moment she came in. It seemed like they were certain that she would not be able to find her way out and were confident that her death was inevitable. Despite the fact that she was still of some use to them, they had still given up just like that. It could be seen that this place must be some sort of forbidden grounds to them. But she did not know how Inge had come to learn the secret of this place. The girl must have quietly gone about to do many things for her sake over so many years. That girl had always been thoughtful and conscientious, and the girl must have guessed that she would come back here one day. How unfortunate that someone who cared so much for her had been killed because of her. Thinking back to how Inge had called out for her to run away back then, Qing Lanfei's eyes suddenly turned red at the rims. She had really dragged the girl down in the end. In that endless silvery white that stretched as far as the eye could see, Qing Lanfei's eyes seemed to see doubles, her sight a misty blur. Right at that moment, a flurry of snow fell down from the sky. She felt a dull, dry ache in her eyes, and she blinked hard in an attempt to ease the pain. She then stretched her hands out to let the falling snow fall onto her clothes and hands. She then caught sight of something, and the expression on her face froze up. Her gaze was fixed upon her sleeve, before it slowly shifted to look at her own body. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. For an instant, she seemed to be seeing things. She could clearly remember that the clothes she was wearing were red. She had always liked the bright flamboyant shade of red, and most of her clothes were mainly red. And she remembered that the clothes she had been wearing from just a short while ago had clearly been red, so why have they turned white as snow in such a short period of time? Not only that, she saw that a lock of her hair, hanging down over her shoulder, had turned to the color of frost. Chapter 311. 1. Loving you is so tiring, I do not want to go on what is happening here. The expression on Qing Lanfei's face turned to shock as a sliver of fear suddenly rose up in her heart. She shut her eyes tight, and then opened them wide again to be certain of what she saw. But what she came to see was just sheer, all-encompassing white, and nothing else. In a blink, it seemed that the entire world had turned white. She shook her head in disbelief, her footsteps reeling a few steps back as she staggered. Something on the ground then suddenly caught her foot, which caused her to stumble and fall to the ground. Oof! Qing Lanfei's brows creased together as she groaned out in pain. A sharp stone had sliced a deep cut in the palm of her palm, and from what she could see, the liquid flowing out from her hand was seen to be white as well. What is happening to her? At that moment, Qing Lanfei finally came to realize where the problem lay. Her fingers trembled visibly as she raised them up to cover her eyes. Has something happened to her eyes? As an elixir cultivator, she immediately felt a sense of panic rise in her upon discovering the situation, but she was able to calm herself down very quickly, her eyes dry and slightly puffy eyes painful as she gazed around at the world that had become all white. She remembered that she had once come across a condition like this mentioned in a book she read. After a person has been trapped in snow-covered lands for a long period, prolonged exposure to the strong and intense rays of the sun would harm one's eyes greatly, bringing about temporary blindness. They would not be able to see any other color, and anything their eyes see would be in the same shade as that icy snow before them everywhere. And at that moment, it was because of that reason that caused Qing Lanfei to see everything in nothing other than a blanket of white. Upon uncovering the cause and reason, her heart that had been lodged in her throat then slowly relaxed. She should feel fortunate that she has not yet completely lost her sight, or the rest of her way forward would be even more difficult. That doesn't matter. As long as she is still alive, she would never give up hope on fighting to live. Mind-free peek. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. In the grand hall right at the summit. The vast hall was so empty that even the slight patter of feet would reverberate and sound out an echo. There was an enormous crystalline screen, and it was split into 4, with similar-sized images reflected on it. The screens were showing the 4 places in the mind-free peak where people were gathered, their every single move secretly being observed. The woman's silver eyes that never showed emotion were peering at 2 particular places, showing on the screens. One was the secret forest Qing you had accidentally stumbled into, and the other was where Lu Junyao and the rest of the people were. Chapter 311. 2. Loving you is so tiring, I do not want to go on to be more exact. Her heart dearly missed that pair of violet eyes. She stared at the screen for a long while, her body not moving an inch and her face somber. Her eyes were slightly narrowed, and it was not known what was going through her mind at that moment. until a man's voice sounded out softly from behind. Apologies. I have been negligent. The woman's expressionless face then seemed to change slightly before she opened her mouth to say slowly, "What are you apologizing for?" The tone of her voice was indifferent, so calm that it was almost impossible to detect whether there was any change in emotion at all. For the past 1,000,000 years, it seemed like she had always been like this. The innocent girl who was prone to smiles and laughter seemed to live only as a figment in memories of the long-distant past. Lian Shi's hands clenched up slightly. The little lass managed to run away. I have really underestimated her. The mind-free peak is filled with all kinds of danger everywhere, and if she comes to meet with any mishap by accident, all your plans might. Oh, is that so? The woman suddenly opened her mouth to interject. Wasn't her escape something you would have expected?
What do you mean by that?
What do I mean? The woman scoffed and then turned around, her gaze fixed right on the man as she said piercingly, "Do you dare to look into my eyes and tell me that you have absolutely nothing to do with this? That you knew absolutely nothing about the entire thing?" Finding himself to be the target of that cold, icy glare, Lian Shi felt his heart wince painfully and the corners of his lips stiffened. "I was the one who personally brought her back here, and you are actually suspicious of me now. Shouldn't I be suspicious of you? Haven't you always been against it all this time? You said that I was being too cold-blooded and that I shouldn't try to defy heaven's will and deny fate, delusionally trying to revive someone who has been dead for many millennia, a person whose flesh body no longer exists." The woman walked up to him menacingly, her eyes sharp and chilling. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Even if I am seeking to change fate and defy heaven's will, so what? I owe him from all the way back, as if it was not because of me, he would not have died. So, even if I have to sacrifice myself here, I must revive him, as he should never have been the person to die back on that day. And I've told you before, that if you are unwilling to help me achieve that, I will not force you. You can very well just leave. The dull ache in Lian Shi's heart grew heavier, and it felt so oppressive that he was finding it hard to breathe for a moment. Those words caused his face to turn deathly pale, suddenly looking highly frail and sickly. However, the woman did not seem to have noticed the ill and wanton look on his face, but went on to say, "Don't forget, you owe your life to him as well when he saved you. These are things that you should do for him." Chapter 311. 3. Loving you is so tiring. I do not want to go on, I have not forgotten that. Lian Shi replied in a solemn voice. For the past 1,000,000 years, the one thing he remembered most clearly in his mind was how he had miraculously come back to life from death, where he, a normal human mortal, slowly turned into a person with highly profound and unfathomable cultivation, a mystical journey that felt both divine and demonic to him. The demonic heart beating in him could not be any more important to him, as he no longer had to continue with the relentless pursuit of immortality anymore, to be able to live forever like this, without aging a single day. But after he had lived for 1,000,000 years, he then came to discover that life was actually so endlessly long and lonely, a dull and dreary existence. Having seen and heard of so many instances of love, hatred, and vengeance in this world, the blissful meeting of smitten lovers and tearful partings, beautiful stories of couples who were heavenly made matches, but none of them was about him, even if it was one that was filled with nothing but sadness. He had waited 1,000,000 years for her, and had remained by her side for that 1,000,000 years. It had been so long that even he himself could no longer remember how many times the seasons had changed through it all. But year after year, she had never ever changed at all, forever too stingy to even throw a smile his way. Because just before Lian Shi died, the man had used his demon's heart to resurrect him. Hence, these two people would become more and more alike in certain aspects, where even their facial features would become about 70% alike. But there was a lack of the devilish air that one of the demon race was born with, his mannerisms and demeanor always seeming so clean and elegant though his body was half demon, where not the slightest sliver of that devilish aura could be seen. Only his eyes, when he was feeling a strong emotional surge, in instances of great joy or extreme sadness and immense anger, would they turn violet, caused by the demon heart beating in his body. But that aspect that was so very much like the original Lianshi had however made the woman's demeanor towards him become even more cold, because that only served to remind her of the fact that Lianshi had already died. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU and the living man before her now was merely a poor imitation who lived using her Lianshi's own heart. Towards this man, she only felt cold hatred and disgust, and nothing else. What I owe him, I will repay him. Lianshi's voice sounded flat and emotionless, like he had just fought through immense sadness and managed to regain his composure. Actually, I really have to thank you. I have to thank you for hating me over so many years throughout, for not having changed your mind just because I have grown to look more and more like him. A smile slowly broke onto Lianshi's face, but that smile seemed to contain an indescribable sense of grief. If you have come to fall in love with me because of that, I think I will feel even more pathetic. Chapter 311. For loving you is so tiring, I do not want to go on. He could only rely on that man's heart to sustain his life, rely on that man's heart to have the excuse to remain by her side, rely on that man's heart that made him look like the man, so that her gaze might occasionally hover over him for a moment longer at least. But he would never turn to become that man himself, never able to openly love her with all that he had. He could never compare to that dead man. It seemed like she had never expected that such words would ever come out from his mouth, and the woman's expression became slightly surprised, but she did not say anything as she stared at the man. But till when will you ever come to understand that he will never come back again? No matter how tirelessly you might work at it, that so-called forbidden technique is merely just a beautiful figment of the imagination, which would not bring about much of a change, but to make you commit more sins by killing innocent lives. Lianshi looked at the woman's face that had now become displeased, and he laughed softly. Without giving her a chance to speak, he continued to say with a faint smile, "If it would make you remember me forever, I wish that I had died back then instead." Upon finishing those words, Lianshi walked out from there slowly, his figure cutting a sorry and pitiful sight. For a moment, she felt rather flustered. For some unknown reason, memories of the past flooded her mind. At that time, they were both still young and youthful friends who were close to each other, and in her memory, he was a foolish kid, always smiling like a fool at her, not even crying out when he got injured. She had asked him why, and he had only replied that it was because he did not want her to worry about him. He had grown a little slower and hence was not very tall but a little plump, although he had outstandingly handsome features, which easily drew people to like him. But it was not known what happened after that, where his body suddenly started to change, where his height sprouted and he became tall and slender, lost his youthful chubbiness to turn into a handsome young man. They had really been very happy together during that period, great friends who could trust each other, till Lianshi appeared. At that moment, she thought that it was possible he had never changed all this time. She was the one who changed. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yushi knew that she had not treated him well all this time, but the person being indulged and doted upon would always not treasure or miss something till it's gone, isn't it? She knew that he would never leave her. Even when he confessed his feelings to her and was rejected, besides being sad and silent, he had still chosen to remain by her side. She had thought that even if the entire world left her, he never would. Despite the fact that her heart would forever only love the Lianshi who had died. But seeing his departing back this time, why does it make her feel like he might possibly really leave her? And it was to leave her world completely. Chapter 312. 1. Releasing the devil in the heart. You sure this is the place? Deep into the dense forest that stretched as far as the eye could see was just a blinding snowy white all around. In the world outside, the season was just beginning to edge into summer, but here in this place, Qingyu stretched out a finger and poked it onto a tree trunk beside her. Under the thick layer of snow that had accumulated, she could not even see what it looked like, and the slight pressure from her finger easily plunged a good half of her finger into the snow. She could see from there how thickly the snow had come to accumulate around the trunk of the tree. Heavens know whether the climate in this godforsaken place had always been like this ever since it came to exist, an incessant blizzard that covered everything in snow. But though she was dressed thinly, practicing the soul burial arts since young had changed her body constitution, hence the temperature on her body was always chilly. She was not feeling cold, as her resistance to low temperatures was a lot stronger than most people. Moreover, she carried phoenix fire in her body, so even though she might look like she should be freezing on the surface, it was actually toasty warm and hot inside. Mistress, you've got to believe me. The aura trail disappeared right at the spot, so your mother must have gone inside this place. The scarlet-red little toddler thumped his chest confidently as he exclaimed, his eyes taunting as he glanced triumphantly at the golden-haired youth standing beside him. The golden-haired youth curled up a corner of his lips, looking like he could not be bothered with the little toddler. He was not going to compete with that childish little runt, as it's still not known who will be the one that would truly be able to help the mistress. He'll just let that little runt be gleeful for now. Silent with her eyes narrowed for a moment, Qingyu then said softly, in that case, then let's go. I hope that we'll be able to bring my mother out successfully. A hand then suddenly came to rest lightly on her shoulder. Qingyu turned her eyes around and saw the youth's handsome face smiling at her, his attractive silver and gold eyes seemingly shining with tiny bits of sunshine. Mistress, I will always be at your side to assist you. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qingyu was taken aback by surprise. It was not known when this youth was able to give her a sense of security like this. Throughout her previous and present life, the best thing was that this fella had always remained there beside her, turning from a cold, emotionless weapon spirit into one of flesh and blood. Was it because he had stayed by her side for so long that he slowly came to develop a sliver of humanity and warmth, becoming skilled at deciphering her thoughts and emotion? In the past, he had just been so willful and unruly. Qingyu curved up the corners of her lips and did not say anything but to merely raise a hand up to ruffle the youth's head of beautiful golden hair. Zhang Mai's eyes blinked in surprise, like he had not expected such a reaction from her, looking like he had so many countless times way back in the past, standing there adorably with a stunned expression on his face. Chapter 312. 2. Releasing the devil in the heart. It had probably been too long ago that this last happened, and he actually found that he missed it a little. So he quietly lowered his head and allowed Qingyu to ruffle his head as she liked. That highly affectionate action had naturally caused the little toddler beside him to immediately see red as he gritted his teeth silently, thinking that this golden-haired fella was really quite a scheming rat. Qingyu then went inside. Actually, it was not just the little runt. She was able to sense the familiar aura in there as well. But for some unknown reason, the aura was very, very faint, so faint that she was almost unable to sense it. Although she did not know the reason why, a bad feeling slowly rose up inside her. Is it because her mother has met with some kind of danger? Or is it because she is hurt, and that is why her aura has become so faint that it is almost undetectable? But no matter what the reason is, she hopes that before she gets to her, nothing bad must happen to her mother. On the other side, after overcoming a bout of danger, the path for the group of people who came into the Mind-Free Peak was relatively peaceful and safe for them. Meatball was leading the way in front, and it was not known whether it was because the powerful aura of its bloodline was so intimidating that not another single spirit beast came to appear before them that made the journey forward safe and quiet for everyone. Upon seeing that, Qing Bei could not help but crease up his brows and asked quizzically, "Meatball, All those spirit beasts that attacked us earlier, were they all of a higher level than you? When the tiny beast walking in front heard that, it did not even turn its head around as it replied, "You do not need to overthink it too much. A dark phantasm spirit cat is already at the 20th level at birth. In terms of levels, no spirit beast can come close to a dark phantasm spirit cat." Those words spoken with absolute certainty felt like they carried a kind of indescribable pride as well. In that case, even if you encounter a spirit beast with high and profound cultivation, you will be able to beat them into a retreat with the powers of your bloodline? In normal circumstances, that will be the case. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Then when we encountered those spirit beasts earlier, why did you not intimidate them and hold them back but made us suffer so much? Qingbei then asked in a slightly begrudging voice. Meatball paused in its steps, its face bewildered. Why should I hold them? They were not attacking me. Qingbei was stumped for words for an instant before he choked out a response. Aren't we working together on the same sides? Of course not. Meatball rolled its eyes as it said that. I am only on my mother's side alone, and nobody else's, just as he thought. He just knew that without Qingyu around, the disdain the little beast had for him just could not be any more obvious, where it could not even be bothered to conceal it in the slightest. Chapter 312. 3. Releasing the devil in the heart. He did not know why the little beast had always disliked him so much. No. It seemed like, besides Qingyu, it had never shown a liking for anyone else. Lu Junyao was following just behind, amazingly silent the entire time. Even the talkative Sun Luo had not gone up to speak to him, because when a certain person was in a bad mood, it was clear and plain for everyone to see, where the aura surrounding him would become exceptionally sinister. As they walked along, the man's footsteps suddenly halted. Sun Luo was just about to ask what was wrong when he saw the man's face turn grim. His devilishly alluring violet eyes turned to stare piercingly at a particular spot. Immediately, the crashing sound of something breaking suddenly rang out through the air. Everyone's face turned severe, as their bodies tensed up warily. Little Monster moved languidly into the direction where the source of the sound had come from, and then said in a lazy voice, "And I have been saying that I felt a pair of eyes following us all this time.
Turns out that I'm right."
Everyone's eyes turned to look, and saw several mirror-like glass fragments lying quietly on the floor, a strange light reflecting off them. "Isn't that a scrying mirror?" someone asked in a surprised voice. Upon hearing what it was, people who did not know it then started to react. So that was the scrying mirror of legends, which was linked to its twin on the other end, allowing someone to clearly see everything that was going on here on this side, like a hidden pair of spying eyes. But it was a very rare and precious artifact, where forging a superior quality pair would require an unimaginable amount of effort and resources. Hence, one would be hard-pressed to even see them throughout the entire cloud heaven. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. But that was not all. In this place they were at that moment, after Lu Junyao smashed the scrying glass, a dizzying amount of blinding flashes appeared before their eyes, revealing countless pieces of those scrying glasses, the light so strong that they were unable to open their eyes. What is going on here? How could there be so many scrying glasses everywhere? Something doesn't feel right. Scrying glasses are extremely rare and amazing treasures, and they cannot be destroyed so easily, as they are always concealed and hidden among many multiple copies of itself, unless the real source artifact itself is broken. With so many replica scrying glasses all around, not only would one be unable to differentiate which one is the real one, their spirit energy would also be depleted from being absorbed by the evil mirrors, which would kill them. Scrying glasses were so rare, not only because the materials to forge them were very rare, but it was also because a demon sprite had to be sealed in the mirror, who lived by bewitching and mesmerizing people's minds, feeding on the energy essence that they managed to absorb from their victims. And it was said that when they managed to absorb the energy essence of 1,000 people, their jobs would be deemed to be done, and the demon sprites would then be able to break out of their mirror prisons, to turn into a human from their demon sprite forms, becoming a person of great evil and wickedness, formed out of the evil thoughts and desires from 1,000 human lives. Chapter 312. 4. Releasing the devil in the heart. Is there a way to break it? The mirror sprite is an evil demon, and the thing it is most afraid of should be a person who possesses blood of the purest bloodline, the most pristine blood in the world, blood that would drive the demon berserk with fear and terror, till it takes its own life. The purest bloodline means the most pristine and unspoiled blood that has not been tainted by evil, blood that runs in the body of the person who does not hold evil thoughts in his mind. Everyone was immediately a little bewildered for an instant. Could such a person really exist in this world? But no matter whether there was or not, it was certain that there wasn't one among this group of people. In the period of time that everyone was locked in animated discussion, the scrying glasses around them had spread densely in number, a great number of them over their heads that had the faces of everyone clearly imprinted upon them. And it wasn't just one face to a mirror, but a great multitude of themselves was captured on them. In myriad states, some of them crying, some laughing, some angry, some happy, good and beautiful ones, evil and ugly ones. Every single one depicted was of themselves, but they did not dare open their eyes to look at them directly. They were clearly showing their own faces, but they all felt so strange and unfamiliar at the same time. Every person had a darker side to themselves, and before the scrying mirrors, nothing could be hidden. They were all standing there together just a moment before, but it seemed like the people beside them had disappeared in an instant, leaving them there all alone by themselves in this space and dimension, with no one else by their sides. On the mirrors that were everywhere around them, a countless number of themselves were aggressively seeking to pounce on them, to devour them. It was the same for Lu Junyao. He had even seen the scene where he annihilated the entire clan of his enemy when he was younger in revenge. He was drenched in blood as he lifted up the small child who was still crying piteously for milk as he laughed maniacally, looking like a bloodthirsty devil. What right do you have to live so happily and blissfully in this world, where you have parents to love you and hold you dear, but I was unable to even see mine even once, very nearly dying in my mother's womb. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. How could they live with themselves after committing such travesty, to go on living with their conscience and not feel the slightest bit of guilt and remorse? Why do these truly evil people not die, but the ones who die are instead the good people that these evil villains claim to be evil? He ignored the child's terrified crying as he spoke those words like he had been possessed, his fingers clutched around the child's brittle neck tightening slowly, till there was no breath left in that tiny young lifeless body. In the end, he just sat there blankly, his eyes horrifyingly vacant. A person sitting alone in that courtyard littered with corpses, his stiffened body frozen in place for a long while, not moving an inch. Chapter 313. 1. Seeing through the demon in the mirror, there were two memories he did not want to recall the most. One was how clearly he remembers the savage way his parents died, and the other was when he lost his mind and killed the entire clan of his enemy in one night, a scene where blood flowed like a river. His heart had been filled with hatred and vengeance. But for that frail and pitiful child, he had not wanted to hurt him. When he saw that the child was covered in blood and squirming in terror on the ground, a sense of pity suddenly rose up in his heart for some unknown reason, making him want to go carry the child. But even such a young and innocent life like that knew that Lu Junyao was a terrifying monster, as it used all his strength to try to escape from Lu Junyao's evil grasp.
Sigh.
How ironic. Why do you fear? At least he had let the child live, hasn't he? In his case, If his mother had not risked her own life and used every last sliver of her strength and cut her abdomen open to give birth to him, he might not have come to exist in this world from a long time ago. His face was filled with thick and heavy irony, but even then, he had not thought of wanting to harm the child. But just as he stretched his hands out and was going to carry that tiny figure, the small child suddenly grabbed his arm angrily and bit him hard. The teetering young toddler, who looked as if he barely only had a tooth or two in his mouth, showed surprising strength in the face of overwhelming fear in that instant, his teeth biting deep into Lu Junyao's arm, seemingly trying to bite off a chunk of his flesh. Feeling the pain, Lu Yunyao instinctively reached out his other hand to save his arm, unconsciously using a bit more strength to grab at the child's chin, seeking to force the child to release his bite. But the teeth of the tiny figure continued to clamp down more tightly, and it could be seen that hatred had sprouted in his large, sparkling bright eyes, like they wanted to deeply remember the face of this irreconcilable mortal enemy who annihilated his entire clan. Looking like that, it seemed to agitate Lu Junyao greatly, extinguishing the last sliver of mercy in his heart. He let out a cold, icy laugh, and without any hesitation, he put an end to that young, fragile life. Once the seed of vengeance came to sprout, it would be very hard to eradicate. Moreover, it was with such a young child, but he already possessed the awareness and was able to remember things that happened around him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He would never leave anyone who harbors ill intentions against him alive, no matter how small the possibility. That was a memory from when he was just a youth, and throughout the ordeal, Lu Junyao was conscious and clear-headed, but it seemed like he was unable to break free from it. Because countless voices continued to echo beside his ears, slowly chipping away at the weakest point in his heart's line of defense bit by bit. How could you be so ruthless? He was just a young, defenseless child. The entire clan numbered hundreds of lives, and you did not even spare the animals. How are you any different from those people? You are even more cold-blooded and heartless than them, killing without even blinking. Chapter 313. 2. Seeing through the demon in the mirror, you are the scourge of humankind, a banal fiend, destined to bring misfortune onto both your parents and everyone around you. Everyone whom you care for will come to a bad end, and that is the retribution you deserve. If your mother had not given birth to you back then, she could very well have the chance to live. But because of you, a person of misfortune, she died out of sheer exhaustion. You should not have lived. You're damned. You should have been the one to die. Why don't you just die already? If you died, then all those things would not have happened. Just die now. Once you're dead, everything will revert back to the way it was, and your parents would still be living well and good. Die already, just die. Lu Junyao's fists turned white at the knuckles, and cold sweat broke over his brow as the voices beside his ears droned on, telling him of all his crimes. It felt as if his existence was really detestable and abhorrent. And every single one of those voices sounded so highly familiar, as they were all his own voice. Would it really be better if he was dead? Is his existence itself really just a mistake? Is it true that once he dies, all of that would not have happened?
Then,
his tightly clenched fists suddenly relaxed. His body was tightly tensed up, and it seemed like his heart was undergoing an immense struggle, causing him to rock a little unsteadily for a moment. "Ah Yao, I need you." The gentle voice of a young lady suddenly sounded softly by his ear. Among the other countless number of berating voices, that one voice stood out clearly. Lu Junyao's body jerked in startlement, his eyes suddenly wide open. He saw a tall, slender young woman standing before him, dressed in pristine white clothes, a gentle smile on her beautiful and exquisite countenance as she looked at him tenderly. Lu Junyao was a little puzzled as he looked at the young lady in front of him. Little fox. How did she come to appear here all of a sudden? Hasn't she been captured? And according to the dark phantasm cat, she wasn't able to move about freely, So how could she possibly appear right before him here? Could this possibly just be a hallucination from his imagination because he missed her too much? Ah Yao, I've finally found you. The young lady's beautiful phoenix-like eyes seemed to be glistening with crystalline tears, looking exceptionally pitiful and endearing. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yushi slowly took a few steps closer and then leaned into the man's arms seeking comfort, her slender arms wrapping tightly around his waist. Lu Junyao's body stiffened up. It was not a hallucination. The touch was real and solid, and even the faint fragrance of herbs her body exuded was exactly the same. Is it really Qingyu?
But
when had she ever shown such a weak and fragile side of herself to him before? Like she was seeking for a man's protection, looking so much like a weak and utterly helpless woman. Chapter 313. 3. Seeing through the demon in the mirror. Although there were times that Qingyu had been weak, but she had always been resolute and obstinate in the face of adversity, where not a single bone in her body was willing to admit defeat. In other words, although Qingyu possessed an extremely beautiful-looking countenance, she was however not anything like a frail and parasitic daughter flower that could only grow when it clung onto a man. There was always an exceptional and unique air about her, so unique that even if there were two faces that looked exactly alike, or if her face had been changed to look completely different, Lu Junyao would still be able to identify her. Hence, when his body came to be hugged by this soft, gentle figure, his eyes that had looked a little bewildered and agonized immediately regained its clarity. He stretched a hand out and rested it softly on the young lady's shoulder, his voice low and magnetically tender as always, its tone unreadable. How did you get out? Isn't it said that you were locked up? It was only after much great effort that I managed to escape from there. I just knew that you will definitely come to rescue me. Her voice was almost on the verge of tears, sounding so very helpless. Hearing that, any man's heart would immediately wrench up in pain, becoming oblivious to anything else but to only properly comfort and soothe this warm, precious treasure huddled in their arms. But Lu Junyao's mind cleared up even more, and a corner of his mouth lifted slightly as he said, "It's been really hard on you. It's all right. Everything's fine as long as you're here." As she said that, the young lady lifted her head up from the man's chest, the expression on her face filling up with a sliver of joy and bashfulness. Though that face was one that he could not be any more familiar with. Looking at it at that moment just repelled him immensely and made him feel nothing but absolute disgust. That face right before him felt so highly fake and pretentious to him, and he wasn't able to find anything beautiful in it at all. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, that was not all. The young lady then pushed herself up to stand on the tip of her toes, slowly moving herself closer to his face, her seductive red lips seeming like she was about to kiss him. Lu Junyao scoffed derisively, and his violet eyes suddenly clouded over with menace as the tips of his long, slender fingers bored viciously through the body of the person right in front of him.
Ugh.
You! The young lady's eyes flared wide open as she stared at the man in utter shock and disbelief before her senses then came to be wrecked by an excruciating and paralyzing pain. Lu Junyao's gaze lowered down slowly as he looked at the body that he had just pierced through with his hand. She was clearly severely wounded, but there wasn't a single drop of blood to be seen. With that injury, the flawless and exquisite-looking countenance then began to change, twisting and contorting. In a short moment, its real looks were then revealed. Chapter 313. 4. Seeing through the demon in the mirror, it was a pale face without the slightest tint of color, a little horrifying to see. The skin sagged heavily, hanging from that face, looking like one would be able to rip the skin right off the face with a slight pull. There was a faint green tinge at the corners of the eyes, and the irises were an abnormal dark red, the entire person looking as a whole, incredibly hideous and evil. It was the demon sealed within the scrying glass. Lu Junyao did not even bother to look at her, but just slowly raised a hand and summoned up a flicker of violet flames on a fingertip before he incinerated his outer shirt on him that the woman had touched into cinders. To a woman, that dealt a deadly and lethal blow to her heart. His contempt towards her was clear and unconcealed. A man of such godly perfection, a high and mighty existence far beyond one's reach. To be detested and abhorred by such a being, just thinking about it would surely be more than anyone could take. How did you see through me? Though the woman looked hideous, her voice was unexpectedly pleasing to the ear, one that sounded like it would belong to a ravishing beauty. She sounded like she could not believe she had been discovered, and was still rather bothered by it. Didn't I look exactly like her? I was even more charming than her, and knew how to win a man's heart better.
Why do you not like me?
Lu Junyao snorted derisively and scoffed in contempt. You think that I am merely attracted to her looks? Aren't you? The woman retorted snappily, her tone of voice carrying a tinge of sarcasm. Aren't all men the same everywhere in this world? Always paying attention only to a woman's looks. If she had a face like mine instead, will you still love her like you do now? The reason you would forever remain sealed inside a scrying mirror like this is because you are only able to survive only by prying into the secrets hidden deep in people's hearts and to use as a tool to further your means. You are really so pathetic and have never known what love really is at all. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You love. The woman appeared to be stunned for a moment. As if she had just heard some kind of a joke, she then threw her head back to laugh hysterically, laughing so hard that tears came to her eyes. Her laughter gradually subsided, and she then pointed at her abhorrently hideous face as she said in a sarcastic voice, "The love you are talking about means to turn a person to look like this. On the night of the wedding, to abandon me by locking me in the room and setting fire to it, burning me alive there, and then because I discovered a secret of his." He then told the world that it was because I was tainted before the marriage and could not bear the guilt I felt towards him, claiming that was why I killed myself by self-immolation as I could not live with myself. Is this what you call love? The woman glared sinisterly at him and said with a mocking smile, "If that is what you call love, then I think I know what it is, and it's etched very deeply in my heart, never to be forgotten." You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.